Imagine ruling not just a nation, but the cosmos. Every sunrise, every flood, every harvest attributed to your will. The people chant your name, not as a man, but as a god. You are Pharaoh divine in title, eternal in ambition, and utterly alone. Welcome. Thank you for joining this journey. Whether it's late and you're drifting off, or you're simply seeking a quiet place to learn, I invite you to settle in. Tonight, we open the golden doors of ancient Egypt to explore not just what the pharaohs ruled, but what ruled them. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you haven't yet, and share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your presence here helps keep this temple of knowledge open. Now, let's begin. For most of us, the word Pharaoh conjures images of golden masks, grand pyramids, and endless desert horizons. We picture kings like Ramses, Tutankhamun, or Akhenaten, shrouded in mystery and majesty. But behind the grandeur lies a paradox. The pharaoh, the most powerful figure in Egypt, was also the most imprisoned. Born into divinity, the pharaoh did not choose this life. He inherited it like a crown too heavy for the head. From the moment of coronation, he ceased to be fully human. He became Horus in life, Osiris in death, a living god whose every word became law, and whose silence could shift the cosmos. Power in Egypt was sacred. The ruler wasn't just a king, he was a cosmic function. His role was to uphold Mat, the principle of truth, balance, and order. Every ritual he performed, every decision he made, had metaphysical consequences. If the Nile failed to flood, if a comet streaked across the sky, the pharaoh was responsible. The gods didn't merely advise him. They were watching. This immense responsibility came with immense isolation. The pharaoh lived surrounded by priests, viziers, servants, and guards, yet alone. Every relationship was political. Every gesture scrutinized. Even joy had protocol. So who were these men behind the crown? What did they believe? How did they live, love, rule, and die? And what happened when they failed? In this series, we won't just revisit famous names. We'll listen to forgotten voices. We'll wander temple corridors, stand beside sacred lakes, and descend into tombs sealed for millennia. We'll explore the myths they lived by, the wars they waged, the temples they raised, and the dreams they carried into the afterlife. We'll peel back the layers of gold to see the fragile humanity beneath. Because in understanding the pharaohs, we uncover something more than history. We glimpse the eternal dance between power and vulnerability, between legacy and mortality. So close your eyes if you wish. Breathe deep. The desert wind is rising. The gods are watching, and our story is about to begin. The sun rises over Thebes. A shaft of golden light spills across the stone courtyards, piercing through columns and shadows. In the inner sanctum of the palace, silence reigns. Then a soft shuffle, a rustle of linen. The pharaoh is awake. He is not simply a man rising from sleep. He is the sun reborn, Horus in flesh, the divine steward of Mata. And his day is a cosmic performance, as orchestrated as any temple ritual. Time itself bends around his routine. The hours do not define his day defines the hours. The first light is met with a blessing. Priests enter the pharaoh's chamber with bowed heads and silent feet. The air is thick with incense, myrrh, frankincense, blue lotus. Attendants chant softly in rhythm with the morning breeze. The room, dimly lit with flickering oil lamps, is more sanctum than bedroom. The pharaoh's body is bathed not in ordinary water, but in sacred water drawn from the Nile, filtered through silver vessels, mixed with oils blessed by priests. His limbs are anointed. Each movement is deliberate. He is not bathed like a man. He is washed like a statue of a god. The attendants move with rehearsed precision. One holds a mirror of polished copper. Another reads verses meant to purify body and soul. The space hums with ritual energy. Servants bring his regalia. First, a kilt of fine linen, pleated with divine geometry. Then the accessories. The flail and crook, symbols of command and care. The broad collar with stones that represent the sky, the earth, and the order between them. Finally, the headdress perhaps, the blue war crown, or the white crown of Upper Egypt, depending on the occasion. Every item is both clothing and spell. Every adornment is a statement to the universe. Once dressed, the pharaoh emerges into the palace courtyard. He is greeted by viziers, generals, and high priests. They kneel. They do not speak until spoken to. His presence is an extension of the god's will. He walks beneath the colonnades, his footsteps echoing in stone rhythm. Statues of gods line the path. A ritual begins. He offers bread and beer, wine and incense. Not for himself, for the gods. Inside the temple of Amun, the rituals intensify. The god's image, kept hidden all night, is unveiled and awakened. Only the high priest and the pharaoh may see it. The god is bathed, clothed, perfumed. This is not symbolism, this is duty. The god must be tended, for through him the balance of the cosmos is maintained. The temple walls flicker with torchlight as incense swirls in sacred patterns. The pharaoh speaks prayers in ancient cadence. His voice is both human and divine instrument. The ceremony is precise. There is no improvisation. Each action is documented. Each word echoes across centuries, written on walls, carried on papyrus, remembered in memory and in stone. To fail the ritual is to invite chaos. To forget a line is to risk the Nile's silence. After the temple rites, the pharaoh returns to the palace. There, he presides over matters of state. Scrolls arrive from distant provinces. News of grain harvests, river floods, building projects. Taxes paid in livestock or papyrus. Requests for judgment in disputes. The great hall is filled with the rustle of parchment, the scratching of reed pens. He meets with his vizier, the right hand of order. Together they plan temple expansions, military campaigns, diplomatic envoys. Every decision is recorded by scribes, whose ink binds history. Even justice is ritual. Court cases are heard. The pharaoh listens, often through intermediaries, then delivers verdicts that are as much spiritual rulings as legal ones. He is judge, but also oracle. He does not just balance scales. He balances the world. In the privacy of the royal garden, the pharaoh sometimes receives his children or selected scholars. Discussions are quiet, often theological or astronomical. Stars are not merely lights in the sky. They are messages, destinies, warnings. He listens to music harps, flutes, chanting. Perhaps he practices archery or chariot driving, or walks slowly past sacred ponds where lotuses bloom and sacred birds perch. But always there are watchers, guards, attendants, priests. Even leisure is supervised. His meals are light and symbolic. Fresh fruits, grilled fish, barley bread. Each dish chosen for its meaning. Figs symbolize sweetness in the afterlife. Onions for protection. Honey for immortality. The pharaoh does not eat. He partakes. As Ra descends in the western sky, the pharaoh returns to the temple. Sunset rituals begin. The god is put to rest, lulled into dreams by chants and offerings. The cycle must be preserved. He reads or is read to hymns to the gods, accounts of ancestors, warnings from dream interpreters. Everything has meaning. Back at the palace, dinner is a ritual too. Not gluttony, but harmony. Food is symbolic. Fish for resurrection, figs for sweetness in the afterlife. Wine flows, but measuredly. Sometimes he eats alone. Sometimes with the great royal wife. Their conversation, if any, is measured, ceremonial. Every sentence echoes within walls that remember. He is not alone, but solitude surrounds him. Before sleep, the pharaoh enters his private shrine. Here, prayers are whispered in darkness. Statues of deities encircle him. Dreams are not accidents, they are omens. A priest sleeps nearby, ready to record them. The stars above him are not random. They are maps, markers, signs. He consults charts, asks questions in silence, awaits answers in symbols. The doors close. The world darkens. Silence returns. And as stars ignite the sky, the divine body of Egypt's ruler lies still, preparing to rise again. In this day, like every day, the pharaoh was not simply alive. He was the linchpin of existence, performing the ancient choreography that kept the sun moving, the river flowing, and the people believing. A day in his life was a day in the cosmos, a ritual from dawn to dusk, an eternity repeated daily. And when morning comes again, the cycle resumes. The king awakens, not as a man, but as an axis around which the universe turns. His life is not his own. It belongs to the gods, to time, to history, and to us who still remember. In the golden silence of the palace, where shadows fall long and the scent of myrrh lingers in the air, power whispers behind every curtain. While the world saw only the grandeur of Egypt's rulers, within the palace walls lived another realm, one of alliances and betrayals, of glances that carried meaning, of sons who waited and wives who watched. The pharaoh, divine to his people, was not immune to the quiet turbulence of his own household. In fact, the closer to the throne one stood, the sharper the daggers became. And the most dangerous battles of Egypt as dynasties were not fought in deserts or on boats crossing the Nile, but in bedrooms, nurseries, and throne rooms thick with incense and tension. Imagine a royal court with a great royal wife, mothers of heirs, priestesses, siblings, and concubines all circled the sun of power. Each had something to gain. Each had everything to lose. The structure of the royal family was complex, a network of hierarchy and ritual. The pharaoh often had multiple wives, but only one held the title of Great Royal Wife. She was the queen in name, often his sister, chosen to preserve royal bloodlines and divine legitimacy. Their union was not always of love, but of lineage, a sacred consolidation of heavenly order. And yet, the presence of concubines and secondary wives introduced a volatile element. They were not always passive shadows. Some were ambitious, politically savvy, and fiercely protective of their children's futures. In their quarters, guarded and gilded, they raised sons who bore royal blood but lacked official recognition, sons who dreamed of crowns. The harem was not a romantic indulgence. It was a political ecosystem. Consider Queen Tai, wife of Amenhotep III. Not born of royal blood, yet she became one of the most powerful women in Egypt. She was depicted the same size as the pharaoh in statues, a visual statement of influence. Her letters to foreign kings show she was respected across empires. And her son? Akhenaten, the pharaoh who had tried to change the very gods. Or think of Nefertiti, more than just beauty and stone. She may have ruled as a pharaoh in her own right. Her presence in art, her positioning beside the king, her iconic crown all hint at a deeper power, one that operated not from behind, but beside the throne. But not every royal woman was beloved. Some were feared, others erased. The battle for succession was constant. In a world where brothers could marry sisters, and half-bloods challenged full-bloods, every cradle held potential for chaos. A son by a lesser wife could ascend if the great wife bore no heir. And so, rumors, alliances, and whispers in the dark shaped the destiny of empires. Historians now suspect that Ramses III was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. Court documents detail a trial involving a lesser wife, Tai, and her son Mentor, accused of plotting to kill the king and install her son on the throne. Their names were struck from monuments. Their trial, preserved in papyrus, reads like a tragedy. A mother's ambition. A prince's fall. The sons of the Pharaoh were educated in palatial schools, raised with ceremony and pressure. But none knew which one might rule. Until the king declared it, the future was a tightrope walk over crocodile-filled waters. Rivalries simmered beneath formal smiles. Even childhood play could have consequences. Daughters, too, were tools of diplomacy. Married off to generals, priests, or even foreign kings, their beauty was currency. Yet some remained close, becoming God's wives among religious leaders with immense clout. Their presence at rituals reinforced the bloodline's divine nature. But it also served as surveillance, a way for the pharaoh to extend control into temple life. As the pharaoh aged, succession became urgent. Sometimes he appointed a co-regent, ruling beside a chosen son to ensure a smooth transition. But even this could spark jealousy. What of the others? Were they content to serve, or did they plot from the shadows? The royal court, while beautiful, was a stage of unending tension. No decision was small. A nod could elevate a servant. A look could doom a son. And through it all, the pharaoh stood at the center, not always aware, not always safe. His power was absolute in law, but fragile in legacy. For in Egypt, the greatest enemy of a king was not the foreigner at the gate. It was the brother beside him, the wife across from him, the child who called him father. In ancient Egypt, death was not an end. It was a doorway. To us, death may seem like a final silence. But to the pharaoh, it was the beginning of a journey more complex than any pilgrimage, more dangerous than any war. A journey not through land or sea, but through realms unseen, guarded by beasts, weighed by gods, and marked by spells. For the people of the Nile, the afterlife was as real as the earth beneath their feet. It had maps, trials, judges, and kingdoms. And the pharaoh, in death, would become a traveler and a god. But not automatically. He had to earn it, step by sacred step. When a pharaoh died, the kingdom paused. The breath of the state held still. His death was not announced immediately. First came silence, secretive rites, preparations whispered in dark halls. Only after his body was secured, purified, and protected would the nation mourn aloud. Mummification began within hours. Time was sacred. Delay invited decay, and with it, failure in the afterlife. The body was brought to the Per-Nefer, the house of beauty. Here, embalmers worked in ritual. The brain was removed through the nose with a hooked tool. The internal organs were taken out, dried, and placed in canopic jars, each protected by a god. The heart seat of thought and morality was sometimes removed, sometimes left in place. It would later be weighed. The body was desiccated in natron salt for 40 days, wrapped over weeks in linen, layer by layer, prayer by prayer. Amulets were inserted to guard the limbs, eyes, and soul. The face received special attention. A mask, often golden, was made to preserve the king's visage for eternity, not just for beauty. For recognition, the gods needed to know who was arriving. All the while, priests recited spells from the Book of the Dead. Not a single volume, but a collection of texts, hymns, passwords, maps, and magic. These spells were not metaphor. They were practical guides. How to pass the lake of fire. How to name the demons at each gate. How to convince the gods you belonged. Tombs were more than graves. They were cosmic machines. Their orientation mattered. The West was the land of the dead. The alignment of corridors with solstices, the painting of stars on ceilings, the inclusion of sacred texts all transformed stone into spell. Every wall told a story. Every chamber served a purpose. The Valley of the Kings became the chosen resting place for many rulers. Hidden in cliffs, sealed against looters, filled with traps and false doors. Still, many were robbed. The fear of theft was real. Some priests moved the royal mummies centuries, later to protect them. In a cave at Deir el-Bahari, dozens of kings were found stacked together like forgotten scrolls. The burial procession itself was a ritual drama. The body was pulled on a sled across the Nile. Priests in jackal masks performed rites of purification. Women wailed in practiced grief. The tomb was sealed with spells. A meal was offered. The king was now beyond reach, but his journey had only begun. In the Duat, the underworld, the soul faced tests. Serpents, fire lakes, gods with knives. The pharaoh had to remember spells, declare innocence 42 times once for each of Egypt's gnomes. He must say, "I have not stolen, I have not lied, I have not slain." Finally, he stood before Osiris. The heart was placed on a scale, balanced against a feather, the symbol of Mada. If it was heavier, Ammit, the devourer, consumed it. Eternal death. If it balanced, the soul entered the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance. But even paradise required vigilance. Spells still mattered. Names still held power. Offerings from the living sustained the dead. Statues of servants, called shabdis, were buried with the king ready to work for him in eternity. And the tomb, though sealed, was not forgotten. Annual festivals brought offerings. Priests maintained rituals. Families remembered. Memory was the bridge. To be remembered was to live again. Over time, beliefs evolved. Under Akhenaten, focus shifted briefly to a single god, the Aten. Tombs changed, prayers changed, but the fear remained. What if death was silence? What if no one remembered your name? So they built, they painted, they prayed, each stone a sentence, each corridor a hymn. We visit these tombs now, quiet as shadows. We read their walls, decipher their spells, and hold their names in our mouths once more. In doing so, we become part of the ritual. We remember, and in remembering, we resurrect. The pharaoh's journey continues, even now. To the ancient Egyptians, stone was not just material. It was memory. It was language. It was permanence. Where others saw walls and columns, the Egyptians saw spells. Geometry was theology. Architecture, a prayer in stone. And each temple, each pyramid, each obelisk was built not merely to last, but to live. Temples were not places of worship in the modern sense. They were not filled with congregants or sermons. They were sacred engines, cosmic blueprints, constructed to maintain the balance of the universe. Every wall carved with images, every statue placed with purpose, every corridor aligned with sun or star. Karnak, in Thebes, is one such place. A city of pylons and pillars. It grew over centuries, each pharaoh adding their voice in granite and sandstone. Walk its hypostyle hall, and the world narrows. Columns as thick as trees rise toward the heavens, covered in inscriptions. Light filters through slats above, painting the gods across stone trunks. It is not merely a building. It is a forest of divinity. Temples were divided by degrees of holiness. The outer courtyards open to priests and officials. Then the inner halls for rituals and sacred music. And at the heart a sanctuary, small and dark, where the god resided. A statue hidden from view, veiled in mystery. Only the high priest and the pharaoh could approach. Even the journey through the temple mirrored creation. From the open air to the shadowed inner sanctum, visitors moved from chaos to order, from the mundane to the divine. It was not just a place, it was a reenactment of the universe itself. And then there were the pyramids, the most iconic structures in Egypt, yet still not fully understood. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Khufu, stands as a riddle in geometry. Its sides aligned precisely to the cardinal points. Its internal shafts angled toward specific stars. It was not just a tomb. It was a launch pad for the soul. Inside, narrow corridors lead to chambers with no inscriptions. Unlike later tombs, the Great Pyramid is silent. But perhaps that silence is its spell. Its form does the speaking. Its very shape a pyramid is a symbol. The Benben stone, the primeval mound from which life emerged. A point that rises from chaos into clarity. And every block, each weighing tons, was a step toward eternity. Obelisks were another language in stone. Tall, slender spires carved from single pieces of granite, often quarried in Aswan. Raised at temple entrances, they pointed to the sky fingers of stone reaching for the gods. Covered in hieroglyphs, they praised the pharaoh and honored the divine. Their tips were often gilded, catching the morning sun, a reminder that light itself was sacred. Some temples, like Dendera, still preserve their ceilings, painted with star maps and constellations. The goddess Nut arches over the world, her body covered in celestial bodies. These were not decorations. They were theology made visible. Architecture extended beyond death. Tombs were homes for eternity. Valley of the Kings, hidden in desert cliffs, holds royal tombs decorated with entire books. The Book of Gates, the Book of the Dead, the Book of Caverns. Walls filled with spells and warnings, maps and instructions. A guidebook for the afterlife. Even homes of the living mirrored sacred logic. The Pharaoh's palace aligned with sacred lakes, gardens filled with symbolic flora. Lotuses for rebirth, papyrus for order. Each element a visual echo of the divine. Egyptian architecture was also an act of timekeeping. The Temple of Abu Simbel is aligned so that, twice a year, the sun pierces the temple's heart and illuminates statues within. One day celebrates Ramses' birthday. The other, his coronation. In stone, they fixed their memory. These monuments were not frozen relics. They were activated by ritual. Festivals renewed them. Music awakened them. Incense fed them. Priests maintained them like one maintains a living being. Over time, many temples were abandoned, buried by sand, repurposed by other cultures. Some were taken apart. Others remained hidden until the modern world remembered them. Today, we walk among ruins, but they are not dead. Their stones still speak. The alignments still function. The shadows still fall with purpose. To build in Egypt was to make an offering to time itself, to carve one's name into the dialogue between earth and sky, and to dare, with hammer and chisel, to speak across millennia. So when we look upon these structures today, we are not just seeing buildings. We are witnessing a conversation between gods and men, between heaven and earth, between the past and the eternity it reached for. When we imagine pharaohs, we picture gold masks and temple walls, but rarely do we see the battlefield. Rarely do we hear the echo of chariot wheels or the rustle of scrolls carried across deserts to foreign courts. And yet, beyond the temple and tomb, pharaohs were also generals, diplomats, architects of empire. Their power was not confined to borders. It radiated outward like the Nile after the flood. To rule Egypt was to be more than a king. It was to be the chosen intermediary between gods and men, protector of Maat, not just at home, but everywhere. Foreign affairs were never just political. They were cosmic. To win a war was to restore divine order. To lose one was to risk the world's balance. In times of conflict, the pharaoh became the warrior king. Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, left us images of the Battle of Kadesh, carved on temple walls. Chariots charge, arrows fly. The pharaoh stands alone, bow drawn, larger than life. But the truth? The battle was likely a stalemate. Still, the depiction mattered more than the outcome. Victory was not just military, it was symbolic. Campaigns into Nubia, Syria, and Canaan expanded Egypt's reach. But conquest was not always about land. It was about tribute, trade, and prestige. Returning with exotic animals, foreign captives, rare minerals, These were offerings to the gods and proofs of divine favor. But diplomacy could achieve what armies could not. The Amarna letters, a collection of clay tablets found in Akhenaten city, reveal a world of correspondence between Egypt and other powers. Babylonia, Assyria, Mitanni. Kings addressed each other as brothers. They negotiated marriages, alliances, shipments of gold. A Babylonian king once wrote to Akhenaten, annoyed that the gold he received was impure. Another asked for more frequent gifts, hinting that respect must be proven in material terms. These letters weren't just polite exchanges. They were chess games. Every gift a message. Every delay an insult. Egyptian princesses were rarely sent abroad. The pharaohs believed their daughters too divine to marry foreign kings. Instead, they took foreign brides into Egypt, daughters of other rulers, who became minor wives, symbols of peace sealed in ceremony. Even diplomacy was a ritual. When Hatshepsut ruled, she sent expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt. What they brought back wasn't just incense and myrrh. It was narrative. Reliefs at Deir el-Bahari show monkeys, trees, and bearded men. The voyage became mythic, a story of divine favor, not trade. Everything a pharaoh did was public performance. Whether standing on a war chariot or under a palace canopy, he was never just a man. He was Egypt. So when enemies threatened, it wasn't just about defense. It was about cosmology. Foreign chaos had to be subdued, not just to protect the nation, but to protect Mate. Pharaohs depicted foreign lands as wild, chaotic, full of strange animals and distorted faces. This wasn't racism, it was theology. Egypt was the ordered center of the universe. All else was potential disorder. But this view could change. Under Akhenaten, diplomacy took a strange turn. He focused inward toward Aten, the sun-disk god. Many foreign vassals wrote him pleading letters. "Send troops," they begged. "We are falling." But the pharaoh remained silent. When order at home became obsession, the borders cracked. Later, under the Ramesside kings, Egypt regained its assertiveness. Temples show long rows of bound captives, names of conquered cities, inventories of spoils. But again, not all this may be literal. It was part of a story. A pharaoh's image as conqueror was as crucial as any treaty. Even after death, his sarcophagus might bear scenes of smiting enemies, of standing upon Nubians and Asiatics. These weren't memories. They were declarations of eternal vigilance. And through it all, the Nile remained a silent witness. Its waters carried troops and grain, gifts and letters. Its current connected capitals, bridged kingdoms. Just as it flowed from south to north, so did Egypt's power-reaching, retreating, reshaping. In war and in peace, in steel and in script, the pharaoh ruled not just people, but perception. To be feared abroad was to be secure at home. To be admired abroad was to be blessed by the gods. And to be remembered in stone was to rule forever. In most civilizations, kings are born of blood. In Egypt, they were born of myth. From the moment of coronation, the pharaoh was no longer merely a man. He was Horus, the falcon god, ruler of the skies. He stood between heaven and earth, a bridge between the mortal and the eternal. His crown didn't just signify power, it invoked it. The divine narrative was not an accessory to rule. It was its foundation. To understand Egyptian kingship is to understand the stories that shaped it. And no story shaped Egypt more than the myth of Osiris. Osiris, the just king, betrayed and dismembered by his brother Set. His body scattered, his rule extinguished, until Isis, his wife and sister, gathered his parts, restored his form, and bore him a son Horus. That son would battle Set to reclaim the throne. The cycle was not just legend, it was a political theology. Every pharaoh was Horus reborn. Every death a return to Osiris. Every coronation a cosmic restoration. So the king's authority wasn't just legal or military. It was sacred drama. Every temple reinforced this myth. Every ritual echoed it. The pharaoh was not admired because he ruled. He ruled because he embodied divine order. His existence was the evidence that the world was as it should be. Even his name carried power. Pharaohs had 5 royal names, each a spell, each a claim. The Horus name, connecting him to the falcon god. The two ladies' name, linking him to protective goddesses. The golden Horus name, the throne name, and the birth name. Together, they formed a sacred identity. To speak the name was to invoke the king and the cosmos. This divine status came with divine responsibility. He had to uphold Ma'at, the principle of cosmic balance, truth, and justice. If the Nile failed to flood, if war broke out, if disease spread, it was not merely a crisis. It was a signal that the pharaoh had failed to maintain harmony. That's why rituals mattered. That's why temples dominated cities. The king prayed, sacrificed, offered on behalf of all. His presence kept the sun rising. His words shaped destiny. But how human was this god? We see his face in statues idealized, serene. We read his words carved into stone, eternal, authoritative. But behind the god mask was a man. One who aged, who ached, who doubted. Some pharaohs leaned fully into divinity. Akhenaten, for example, rejected the old gods, proclaiming Aten the sun disk as the sole deity. He called himself the son of Aten. He moved the capital. He erased Ammon's name. His art showed him oddly elongated, otherworldly. He blurred the line between man and God completely. Others used myth politically. Ramses II declared himself the chosen of Ra, the reborn Horus. He filled temples with colossal statues of himself, aligned with solar paths. In Abu Simbel, his image watches the sunrise twice a year, as if nature itself bows to him. But the myth was not only about self-glorification. It was a burden. To be a god was to be watched, judged. Every action mattered. Every failure threatened not just a dynasty, but the universe. The coronation itself was a ritualized rebirth. The king received regalia, the crook and flail, the Nenis headdress, the double crown. He entered the role as Horus, and upon death, he became Osiris, lord of the afterlife. Statues depicted this cycle. Horus behind the king, offering protection. The king seated beside gods. The line between divine and human blurred until it disappeared. And the people believed, not in blind obedience, but in sacred rhythm. The king was not just obeyed, he was participated in. Festivals reenacted his victories. Songs praised his deeds. The nation moved to his pulse. Even rebellion took divine form. When authority crumbled, it was seen not as a failure of policy, but of cosmic dissonance. The myth had broken. Chaos threatened. So temples rose higher. Statues grew larger. Names multiplied. To be remembered was to remain divine. And in that memory, carved deep in granite and gold, the pharaoh still rules. Not just as a man, but as a myth. A living god whose story refuses to end. Power glitters from a distance, but up close, it can suffocate. To rule Egypt as pharaoh was to stand alone, atop the social order, beneath the gods, and between life and death. Revered, adored, but never touched. This isolation was not just symbolic, it was architectural. The pharaoh's palace was a world unto itself, walled, guarded, silenced. His steps were echoed by priests, monitored by scribes, interpreted by seers. Every breath measured, every glance decoded. To the people, he was a living god. But to himself, was he still a man? The burden of divinity demanded perfection. And perfection, sustained too long, begins to crack. Under the gold, behind the mask, what remained? He could never cry in public, could never doubt, stumble, or age visibly. To do so would fracture the illusion, endanger the realm. His pain was sacrilege, his weakness a cosmic threat. No friend could be trusted fully. Every smile might hide ambition. Every advisor might be a rival. Even within his family, danger loomed. Sons with eyes on the throne, wives with private prayers, brothers with veiled alliances. History offers us glimpses. Take Akhenaten, a visionary or a madman. He shattered centuries of worship, elevating one god, Aten, above all. He closed temples, changed art, moved the capital to a new city built from scratch. His portraits show a strange figure, elongated limbs, sunken cheeks, distant gaze. Was he unwell, or simply untethered from the world around him? His rule isolated him. His own priests turned. His successors erased his name, or considered Tutankhamun, the boy king, crowned at 9, manipulated by regents, burdened by ancestral expectations. He restored the old gods, but died before 18. His tomb small, rushed, but intact, speaks not of grandeur, but of fragility. Inside, a walking stick, a sign of illness, injury. Behind the gold mask, a skull with signs of trauma. And Ramses III, surrounded by plots, betrayed perhaps by his own harem. A lesser wife, seeking the throne for her son, orchestrated a conspiracy. Magic spells, poison, knives. The pharaoh died possibly dismembered. The trial records remain, vivid as drama. The pharaoh, divine, cut down by whispers. Power isolates. And isolation breeds shadows. Mental strain, paranoia, the weight of ritual. These were constant companions. A mistake in a festival could doom the Nile's flood. A mispronounced spell might anger a god. Sleep, when it came, was filled with omens and dreams to be interpreted. No one could say, "I understand." No one could touch the king without ritual. Even his laughter was ritualized. Even his silence was sacred. And yet, somewhere beneath the crowns and titles, there was a person. Perhaps a boy who once played by the river, now dressed in divine regalia, unable to speak without echo. His loneliness was a function of power. His mind stretched between heaven and earth, between image and reality, between desire and duty. He could not retire, could not confess, could not escape. Even in death, he was expected to guide the nation. His tomb a map, his name a prayer, his legacy a burden passed to another. So when we see their statues colossal, unmoving, serene, we might imagine peace. But perhaps, behind the stone eyes, there is a whisper, a desire not for gold or conquest, but for rest, for someone to say, "You may lay down your crown," for silence that isn't sacred, but soft. To be a pharaoh was to hold the sun, but holding the sun burns. For centuries, Egypt slept beneath the sand, its temples buried, its gods silenced, its names forgotten. Time passed. Empires rose and fell. Alexander came, and then Rome. Christianity swept through, and the old gods were buried beneath new beliefs. Temples became quarries. Statues were toppled. Papyrus crumbled. The language vanished. The stories, once carved into stone, became strange and unreadable. By the Middle Ages, even the word pharaoh was a relic. And then, 1,000 years after the last hieroglyph was written, the sands began to whisper again. It began not with scholars, but with curiosity. Travelers from Europe marveled at broken columns, strange symbols, colossal faces emerging from dunes. They called it Oriental mystery, a land of magic and ruins. Napoleon invaded Egypt in 1798. He brought not only soldiers, but scientists, artists, linguists. Their mission was conquest, but also cataloging. The description d'Isle Egypte, a monumental work, documented the wonders of the Nile. For the first time, ancient Egypt was mapped, drawn, measured, but its soul remained locked. The language hieroglyphs was undeciphered. A wall of silence stood between the modern world and the ancient voice, until a stone changed everything. The Rosetta Stone, found in 1799 by a French soldier, inscribed with 3 scripts, Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It was a message repeated in multiple tongues. A linguistic time machine. For years, scholars puzzled over it. And then came Jean-Francois Champollion, a prodigy in languages, obsessive, unrelenting. In 1822, he cracked the code. He realized that hieroglyphs were not just symbols, but a mix of phonetic and ideographic signs. He wrote the names Ramses, Thutmose. Finally, the stone spoke. The dead had a voice again. And with that voice, a tidal wave of rediscovery began. Tombs were opened, temples uncovered, mummies unwrapped. Egyptology was born, but it was not always gentle. Early excavations prized treasure over context. Artifacts were taken to museums. Paintings faded under light. Sacred spaces became exhibits. Yet fascination grew. Howard Carter, in 1922, discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, intact, gleaming, a chamber untouched for over 3,000 years. Gold, thrones, toys, even food. And at the center, the boy king himself. His mask became the face of Egypt reborn. The world was transfixed. Egypt was no longer just history. It was myth rediscovered. Hollywood took notice. So did poets, mystics, dreamers. Egypt became a symbol of mystery, of beauty, of the eternal. But with rediscovery came responsibility. Modern Egypt faced a question. Whose past is this? Nationalists demanded repatriation. Scholars debated ethics. Tourists flooded in. Some temples were damaged. Others submerged under new dams. The construction of the Aswan High Dam threatened the temple of Abu Simbel. But in a feat of modern engineering, it was cut into blocks, moved uphill, and rebuilt, stone by stone. A modern pyramid of preservation. Today, Egyptology is a global science. Yet the story belongs to Egypt. Archaeologists now collaborate more with local experts. Museums face pressure to return artifacts. The conversation continues. But one thing is certain. The silence is over. We can read the prayers again, hear the hymns, trace the stories, understand the symbols. The pharaohs are no longer just statues. They are voices. And in that rediscovery, we find not just them, but ourselves. Our longing for meaning, our reverence for time, our awe at what hands can build and what memory can preserve. Egypt was never lost, only waiting to be heard again. The sun sets over the Nile. Golden light brushes the stone faces of long-dead kings. The air is still. Somewhere, beneath sand and silence, a name is whispered. The pharaoh is gone, but the echo remains. And what is an echo, if not a kind of immortality? For all the gold, the armies, the temples aligned with stars, for all the power held in hands that ruled the world, what endures is something quieter, something simpler, a story. The true gift of the pharaohs is not in their crowns or tombs. It is in the question they leave behind. What does it mean to live forever? They tried to answer that in stone, in ritual, in myth, and in doing so, they revealed something deeply human. They feared forgetting. They feared vanishing. They feared silence. So they carved their names 1,000 times, painted their victories, preserved their bodies with the tenderness of prayer. They imagined judgment, weighed hearts, measured truth against feathers. They rehearsed eternity so carefully, so completely, that we are still playing our part. We speak their names. We walk their halls. We wonder. And in that wondering, they return. The legacy of Egypt is not its monuments, but its perspective. A worldview that saw time not as a line, but as a circle, where death was not the end, where stories mattered more than facts, where the stars told tales and stone remembered. The Pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was memory incarnate. He was duty sculpted into flesh. He was belief given breath. And yes, he was flawed. He was feared. He was sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, but always symbolic, always larger than one life. In our age of instant forgetting, there is something grounding in their obsession with remembrance, something beautiful in the way they turned history into hymn. They remind us that memory is power, that legacy is a language, that to be remembered is to matter, not with fame, not with monuments, but with meaning. So as we end this journey through chambers and rituals, through gods and shadows, through madness and myth, we arrive not at a conclusion, but at a reflection. What will we leave behind? What will they find of us, centuries from now, buried in the dust of our own ambitions? And what story will they tell? The pharaohs are gone, but they are not lost. They built to be remembered. And in remembering them, we build a little too. Not temples, but understanding. Not pyramids, but connection. Not immortality, but meaning. Thank you for walking with them. Thank you for listening. And may your name, too, be remembered, long after the last stone falls. And so, as our journey fades into the quiet of night, let us pause beneath the stars, like the ancients once did, and reflect on what we have uncovered. From the moment the Pharaoh opened his eyes at dawn, we stepped into a world not just of gold and stone, but of meaning and myth. We saw how every action, every breath, every word was woven into a ritual of cosmic alignment. A day in his life was a day in the life of the universe itself. We wandered the royal corridors where whispers held more power than swords. In the intimacy of the palace, politics unfolded not in decrees, but in glances, in births, in betrayals. The family of the Pharaoh was both a source of strength and his greatest danger. We followed the king into the underworld, where death was not a disappearance, but a transformation. There, spells lit the path, and hearts were weighed. Death was not feared, was prepared for. We stood before the towering temples and silent pyramids, and understood them not as buildings, but as conversations between heaven and earth. Architecture became language. Obelisks pointed to the sky not to impress, but to commune. We witnessed the Pharaoh's diplomacy and his wars, not merely battles of territory, but performances of divine balance. Even letters to foreign kings were rituals. Even silence was a weapon. We entered the myth, where the Pharaoh became Horus, became Osiris, became God. His rule was not his own. It belonged to the gods. And to the story, we saw the weight of the crown, the silence behind the smile, the loneliness behind the throne. Power did not free him, it enclosed him. And then we rediscovered him, buried, forgotten, broken, and yet still speaking. Through stones, through names, through memory. What we've walked through is more than history. It is legacy. It is a civilization's attempt to outlast time by becoming one with it. Asterisk, asterisk, so what remains? Asterisk, asterisk, a reminder that memory matters. That meaning can be carved into stone or spoken gently in the dark. That to be remembered is not about power, but about purpose. If you've stayed with us until now, I thank you deeply. You've become part of this ritual. You've kept their names alive. You've allowed the story to breathe again. So now I invite you. No, I ask you be the next guardian of this memory. Like, comment where in the world you watched from. Share which part of this journey moved you most. Subscribe to keep walking these quiet, ancient paths with me. Because the past is never truly past. Not as long as someone listens. Not as long as you remember. Good night. And may your name, too, echo softly into time.